Slavery, spanning centuries and continents, has left an undeniable mark on history, rooted in the exploitation and control of one group by another. It takes various forms, from forced labor to human trafficking. Delving into its historical impact sheds light on its enduring legacy of oppression and the ongoing struggle for justice and equality since the colonization of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico's rich history is a tapestry woven with threads of colonialism, cultural exchange, and the relentless struggle for autonomy. From the arrival of Christopher Columbus in 1493, the island became a crucible of indigenous Taino and African culture along with the Spanish, leaving an undeniable mark on its language, heritage, and societal structures. However, beneath the surface lies a dark truth of coherence, enslavement, and oppression. To understand the complex history, it is important to look at the relationship between slavery and its colonial development to understand the roots of slavery and its impact on Puerto Rican society. The arrival of Spanish conquistadors in 1493 marked a turning point for the native inhabitants, the Taino people of Puerto Rico. Spanish conquest and colonization led to their enslavement, leaving a profound social impact on their thriving society.
It started shortly after Christopher Columbus arrived here, and that was on November the 19th, 1493. People here became enslaved by the Spanish government in Spain. They were enslaved for up to 1542, when they were released from their slavery.
The Taino people, indigenous to the Caribbean, flourished in harmony with their environment, displaying a remarkable resilience and ingenuity. However, their peaceful existence was shattered with the arrival of Spanish conquistadors like Christopher Columbus and later on, Juan Ponce de Leon. Juan Ponce de Leon laid the groundwork for Spanish colonization in Puerto Rico by establishing the settlement of Capara in 1508, which was later relocated and renamed San Juan. To protect its interests in the Caribbean, the Spanish constructed formidable fortifications such as El Morro and San Cristobal, which served to fortify the island against attacks and consolidate Spanish dominance in the region. Additionally, efforts were made to assimilate the indigenous population into Spanish culture and religion through the imposition of the Spanish language and customs. This marked the beginning of a permanent European presence on the island and the implementation of the encomienda system, resulting in the Taínos' population eventual decline. The origins of slavery on the island can be seen with the arrival of Spanish conquistadors. The Spanish began establishing the encomienda system. The encomienda system granted Spanish settlers from the Americas the authority to extract labor and tribute from indigenous populations, leading to dire consequences for the Taino people. This system, endorsed by the Spanish crown, rewarded individual conquistadors with the land and labor rights in exchange for their contributions to colonization efforts. Encomenderos exploited this authority, forcing indigenous Taino people into various labor tasks under harsh conditions, while also demanding tribute payments in crops, gold, or resources. The system led to dire consequences for the indigenous population, including a significant decline due to forced labor, disease, and mistreatment.
It was Dr. Ramon Bastante, and he saw a lot of the harshness that the slaves, African slaves, were living under. They were very, lived under extreme poverty. They weren't taken care of very well, acquired a lot of different sicknesses, and they had to come up with their own remedies, homemade remedies.
Initially, a facade of peace masked the exploitation and enslavement of the Taino population until the appearance of Bartolomé de las Casas and his advocacy of fighting slavery and colonial abuse of the indigenous peoples. Bartolomé de las Casas was a Spanish Dominican friar, historian, and early advocate for human rights, particularly for indigenous peoples in the Americas. In Santo Domingo, he witnessed the exploitation of indigenous populations by Spanish settlers and underwent a spiritual conversion, dedicating himself to defending indigenous rights. As a priest, he intervened in legal disputes to defend indigenous communities. These disputes often revolved around issues such as land rights, labor conditions, and the enforcement of colonial laws that affected indigenous communities. This began his lifelong advocacy through writings and speeches, laying the foundation for his later activism across the Americas. His advocacy and writings were instrumental in raising awareness of the mistreatment of indigenous peoples in the Spanish colonies. which contributed to the broader discussions and debates that led to the issuance of the Burgos Laws. While the Burgos Laws aimed to address the mistreatment of indigenous peoples in the Spanish colonies and regulate labor practices, they inadvertently created a vacuum in the labor force, as Spanish settlers sought to maintain their economic interests.
The Spaniards wanted gold, lots of gold, and so they used the Taino Indians to go into the mines and dig out the gold, and a lot of the Taino Indians died doing that.
As a result, the introduction of African slaves became a pivotal solution to the growing labor demands in colonies like Puerto Rico. With the decimation of the Taino population and the depletion of gold, the Spanish saw the production of sugarcane and the transatlantic slave trade as a way to save their failing economy on the island. The first African slaves were introduced to Puerto Rico around 1513 through the slave trade, which is where slaves would be kidnapped, put on a ship carrying 200 to 1,200 slaves, and sold. Most of the African slaves brought to Puerto Rico came from the Gold Coast, Nigeria, and Dahomey. Many tribes were Yoruba, Ashanti, Fon, and Igbo from Nigeria and other Bantu areas on the Kino coast. The slave trade would start with the traders from European ports towards Africa's west coast. The Middle Passage, the voyage across the Atlantic, will last around 6 to 8 weeks, and a few slaves would survive the trip. When the slaves reached Puerto Rico, they would be forced to work on sugarcane plantations. It is believed that some 30 to 40,000 African slaves were brought to Puerto Rico by the Spanish to work mostly on agriculture in the fields of sugarcane plantations. The rise of sugar production in the 17th century fueled the expansion of haciendas across the island. Enslaved Africans became the backbone of the sugar economy, toiling under the harsh conditions to satisfy the insatiable demand for sugarcane. Some of these harsh conditions included working under the scorching sun without anything to protect them and being beaten as if they refused to work or were unable to do so. Slavery became deeply entrenched in Puerto Rico's economy through the 18th and 19th centuries, fueling the lucrative sugar industry and other rising agricultural products such as coffee. The growth of commercial agriculture required more labor. As a result, between 1820 and 1840, the slave trade increased until England put pressure for the end of the slave trade as reform movements around the world began questioning the morality of slavery as an institution. Despite the evils associated with slavery, its impact on the island was profound, shaping its social fabric for centuries to come. Slavery's profound impact on Puerto Rico helped shape its identity. One of the most significant effects on Puerto Rican society was the interracial mixing of the Spanish with the enslaved and subjugated population of the Taínos and Africans. The blending of the Spanish, African, and Taíno cultures contributed to the rise of a new society with a distinct cultural identity. With interracial mixing, we see the evolution of social classes. The social pyramid was based on the person's status, birthplace, skin color, and ethnicity. At the top were the Peninsulares from the Spanish mainland, and below them were the Criollos, people born on the island who were descendants of the Spanish. At the bottom of the pyramid were the mestizos and mulattos, a mix between Spanish and native and Spanish and black. Last in the social hierarchy were the slaves. This social class system shaped how society was structured, determining who had the money, the power, and rights. As Puerto Rican society evolved through the centuries, different classes and ethnicities often mixed with each other, blending the differences to create one distinct Puerto Rican society. The African influence on Puerto Rican culture is significant and multi-faced. Enslaved Africans who were brought to the island during the 16th century brought with them an array of customs that were drawn from various African cultures. The vast majority of these enslaved Africans were captured by the Yoruba and Igbo tribes in Nigeria and the Bantus from the Guineas. The tonal language of Yoruba, in particular, had a significant impact on Puerto Rican Spanish, giving it a distinctive sound. The African languages in Puerto Rico have also influenced the phonology of Puerto Rican Spanish with the deletion of final consonants like S and N, as well as the alteration of L and R consonants. They did not just bring over their language, but they also brought over their styles of music. Instruments such as barriles and dance forms such as bomba and plena were some of the enriching elements enslaved Africans brought towards the Puerto Rican society. Even Puerto Rican expressions like chévere, ñame, and gandules have African origins. The African slaves influenced our culture with things like gastronomy, language dialect, types of music, as well as part of their religion and festivities. Another way they were able to influence the island is by helping to build the island, by building many towns and settlements, building up the economy, and other things like mixing different cultures. The African influence on Puerto Rican culture is undeniable and something to be celebrated and explored. Exploring the history of Puerto Rico reveals a complex and fascinating story that has left a deep impact on its society. The legacy of slavery has shaped its identity and social structure, yet it coexists with a rich cultural mix of traditions that continue to thrive. By acknowledging the past atrocities and recognizing Puerto Rican people's resilience, we can honor their enduring spirit that continues to shape their collective identity. By embracing the diversity and strength obtained by its rough past, Puerto Rico can continue towards reunion and empowerment. Understanding and honoring this complex history is crucial to shaping a brighter and more inclusive future for Puerto Rico.